Hey everybody, Payments Professor here, and today's Payments Podium, we're going to have some fun. We're going to talk about going green, but I don't mean going green when it comes to, saving the economy. We're going to talk about actually cannabis banking. It's a hot topic. It's been a hot topic in the industry, and I've got Connor McKenna. He is with LeafLink, and he's going to be guiding us through this journey of cannabis banking. So, Connor, welcome to the Payments Podium.
Thanks so much, Kevin. I'm really excited to chat with you. Looking forward to getting into it.
All right. Today's topic is cannabis banking. Why is this such a hot topic in the industry right now? I mean, what is causing it to where people are like, cannabis banking, it's like it's its own thing and it's its own hot topic. Why is that?
Yeah, so look, cannabis is the very fun new thing that everybody's talking about. When I first started at LeafLink, I quickly became the most interesting person in my family for Christmases and Thanksgiving. You can get paid from that. So it's really crazy. It's we like to call it at LeafLink, we call it a startup industry, and we're a startup company within a startup industry. So it's an incredibly underserved space that has some really hockey stick growth over the last 5-6 years. I think overall, from like a wholesale perspective, it's projected to hit 50 billion by 2030. So it's the new thing. It's starting to grow with larger states legalizing and getting recreational adult use going on. It's been a hot topic, and even from the political sense to the banking sense, even from wherever you are. I'm in New Jersey, and we launched rec sales a couple of years ago, and it's popping up like wild, like just weeds. No pun intended there. So yeah, it's a really interesting space that there's a lot of problems with. And part of the things that we're looking into is how do we help solve those?
All right, I got to tell you right away, there's several things I heard in there. First of all, I've got friends and colleagues that when they hear your family and friends want to hear about your job and you're able to explain it, they're jealous right away. Because working in payments for years, my family still can't tell you what I do. So to hear you're the hot topic at Christmas, I'm jealous. Now, there were also several other puns that were in there. Things are growing. And the big question that comes up, the hockey stick growth, gosh, everybody's wants to hear that. Why is it a problem, though? I mean, if it's legal in the state, why is this a problem? Why is cannabis banking such a hot topic and also, such a problem?
So for the longest time, cannabis has just kind of had this stigma from being a largely illegal product from, even flashback to 2013, where a handful of states were medical. And I believe at that time, that's where we got our first recreational states on board, either Washington or Colorado. So the industry has been around for a while, but considering that the federal government still has it as an illegal substance and a Schedule I narcotic, very few, if any, operators are comfortable in that space. Oftentimes, specifically with cannabis banking, we find that the banks that are supportive of the space are these smaller credit.
If the problem is where the states are doing it differently versus it's actually federal regulated, why are some states more willing to do it where other states are fighting against it if it's become legal within the state?
Yeah, so I think it all ultimately comes down to where the key operators are in the states, what the profile of the users in the states are. More often than not, we're seeing a lot of the Northeast, a lot of the West Coast, a lot of the coastal states that are turning on cannabis. But we've seen some of the most healthy markets coming from the Midwest states. Michigan and Missouri are probably the the top two markets as of late that have had really healthy payments, really healthy operations.
Wait. Michigan and Missouri in the Midwest are where you're seeing the most activity? Because to me, that's a shock. What I've heard and seen, experienced in my time in the industry is, that's the Bible Belt breadbasket, and they were one of the last ones to get in the riskier areas.
Yeah, it's as surprising as when I first kind of got into the space and realized that. But Michigan has been really, really strong over the last couple of years since legalizing in 2019. And then considering Missouri, they just launched recreational sales last year. And I believe in their first month, they topped over 100 million in just rec sales alone. So it's incredible how fast these guys are going. And it's even more incredible realizing that a lot of these have done it with either a very tiny non-strategic bank or no bank at all. For the longest time, operators weren't running banks. It was all cash. It was very dysfunctional, very disjointed. And it was just very difficult to have like a sheer source of truth from a financial perspective. So it just makes it even more impressive that cannabis has come this far when few operators have had, like the real blue chip banks that are willing to give you credit, willing to open up their payments portals and payments processes to you. They've just kind of built the cannabis space with like what I like to call super glue and duct tape. It's
super glue and duct tape. Okay, now here's the thing. I want to clarify something real quick for people that are listening. Who are we actually banking? Because I know sometimes people hear the term cannabis banking and they're like, so I'm letting the drug dealer down the road be able to go from, selling drugs on the street corner with all cash to now being able to do this electronically? Or are we actually banking known entities, real companies with legitimate purposes?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We're getting these folks who are LLCs, they're licensed entities with the state, meaning that they've done their diligence, they've built out an entire operational process, and they've acquired the proper licenses to supply either medical, recreation, or both for it. So these are well-established businesses, not the guy on the corner selling crappy dime bags to you. And a lot of these businesses that we're seeing, they're becoming more and more sophisticated by the day. They're having some legacy financial accounting folks who have been, bookkeepers for very, very high end legal industries coming into the cannabis space to try to give out more structure and to have that establishment trail on. And again, the banking aspect is a key cog in this entire thing. Many people are just kind of comfortable with who they have from a banking perspective. And a lot of the times it's basically who they know in their backyard. Not a lot of banks are kind of far wide spreading to where you can just kind of go onto a portal, search for banking there. It's tough. Some banks don't feel comfortable publicly voicing their support of cannabis. Others that are, again, these tiny credit unions or smaller state chartered banks who may not give the 100% of their services to these operators.
So if I heard right, there are actually banks and credit unions that are banking cannabis, but they don't let anybody know that they're doing it. It's like, maybe if the right customer were to ask. I mean, it's kind of funny because it sounds like, how drug dealing used to be back in the day. I'm just saying. And to hear that, hey, it just for you, we'll do this, but don't tell anybody else what's going on here. Are there any, though, that are out there that are actually advertising it? Are there any that are being, let's say, more aggressive about working in the industry?
Yeah, there's definitely banks that over the last couple of years have become more outward with the banks.
Mm-hmm.
With my past 4 years at LeafLink, even just noticing our customer trends and just kind of seeing what's happening in the market, more and more banks are getting comfortable with the cannabis vertical. And there are some that are kind of betting on it being a very key strategic vertical for them to pursue. So we're getting there, but it's just not fully there yet to where the mom and pa's, the mid guys, as well as the massive multi-state operators have the same access to banking, which is probably the biggest industry pain point in all of this.
Can I revisit again the who actually needs this banking aspect? Because one of the things is when we start talking about who needs to be able to use this, I see it as, okay, as a consumer who walks into a dispensary, they want to be able to, with their account, make a purchase electronically and not carry a lot of cash around. But then I also immediately think it's the dispensary, which in some states that, you go to, I've seen them. Like Oklahoma, I jokingly once said at a conference, there's one in every corner beside the Starbucks. But isn't it more than just the dispensary and the consumer? Because aren't there other entities along the path or the, let's call it supply chain, that need to have the services as well?
Yeah, I mean, the cannabis space is more than just your brick and mortar dispensary. For everyone that walks into a dispensary, for all those products, all those brands that are on there, those are different operators that are, providing services that need banks as well. Even looking a little bit beyond that from our kind of the sales chain that you talked about, from the dispensary, which is more customer facing. Then we get into the B2B where it's the dispensary and the brand are now kind of communicating with one another, and those two operators need bank accounts. Then, even looking further beyond that, there's also the growers, the cultivators, the distributors that are engaging with the cannabis product that also need banking services. In the space, the legal view of it is kind of broken out into tiering systems. So tier one is considered plant touching entities. So those are the brands, those are the growers, those are the cultivators, those are one who are actually kind of getting their hands dirty with the product to make it and sell it. Then there's
So
the
tier
tier
one
two.
is the people who are producing, creating, making this. I mean, they're the growers, right?
Yep. Yeah, anybody who is physically touching and take ownership of the product, those are the tier ones. And those are by far the riskiest in terms of how banks are viewing the cannabis space. Those are the most riskiest clients because there's just so many BSA, AML, other compliance topics there that we could probably spend a long time talking about. But those are the primary concerns with the tier one.
Okay, are those the ones where the term seed to sell comes in? Because I know that term in cannabis banking I hear all the time. You got to be able to track every single seed to the point where it's actually sold.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So the seed to sale, there's some government platforms that help with brands tracking that. But yeah, the seed to sale is very much, it's the entire process where you can track it from a tiny little seedling all the way to the joint in your buddy's hand that can be tracked.
And people worry about government tracking. Okay, now let's go ahead. No, I got another question. You mentioned tier one. What's after tier one? What are we looking at after that?
Yeah, after that is called tier two. And those are the ones providing services to the cannabis space who aren't actually touching the product. So, anybody performing like software or any kind of technology to the cannabis space, those would be considered tier twos. A lot of the times, the folks who are selling like cartridges or actual equipment for people to fill actually with the product. So, with any kind of like vape cartridges, the cartridges themselves that are being sold directly to the cannabis space, those are be considered tier two entities.
So tier two entities they're not growing drugs, making drugs, or anything like that. Nothing, no cannabis is touched by them, but they make like products like you said, the vape pen, let's say itself, not the THC content that goes into the vape pen. They just make the vape pen itself, or would it be people who provide like irrigation services products or like that to them as well?
Yeah, it really kind of comes down to who's providing a service to the cannabis space without actually kind of taking ownership of it. Banking is a lot easier for those. It's still a problem. There's still concern there just because for a lot of these banks, and really kind of what it comes down to as to why some of these banks aren't supporting the space, is that they're not too sure how to sufficiently run their compliance that's okay with their regulators for it. So that's kind of like the biggest looming out there, is just kind of a lack of awareness or understanding of how do we compliantly run a cannabis banking program. So we've seen a lot of these service providers who aren't touching the product have a little easier time once the regulators kind of understand what's going on. But it's still a problem. There's still a little black smudge on everything here.
I actually heard somebody at a conference say more than likely every financial institution in this room, and there was probably about 200 of them at the time, and it was in the Midwest, said that you are probably dealing with somebody who is a tier two and don't even know it.
It's surprising. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that's the case. And now just with how legalization has gone, I think last time I checked, there's probably at least like 26 or something. Definitely, the majority of the states in the U.S. have some form of legal cannabis around. So it just makes sense as to opening it up a little bit more, and these providers who are providing a service and they're not getting their hands really into the product should be able to kind of get that access to it. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Okay, I don't want to make this a commercial, but I got to ask, how does LeafLink help? What is it that you do to provide the industry services to make this an easier process?
Yeah, LeafLink was started around like 2015, and it started when our founders first wanted to go into Colorado. They knew they wanted to serve the cannabis space, but they weren't sure what problem to solve. So they wanted to go in to figure out what are some of the larger pain points from the B2B perspective. We know like the B2C is a little difficult. From there, just a lot more risk, and there seem to be just all these different fragmented resources, tools that they could use. But knowing that the B2B space in cannabis and really in all other kind of industries, I don't think anybody's really gotten B2B 100% right.
Mhm.
So going into the space, we realized that there is just a incredibly poor way to manage purchases between brands and dispensaries. Invoices were kind of emailed or texted even. There was no clean way to share your inventory. A lot of the operators we spoke to in Colorado had sales guys who were just driving up and down from Fort Collins to Pueblo and all the way, east and west of Denver, just sharing what they have from a menu perspective out with folks. So, Colorado's a big state, so that's got to take a long time to see everybody. So there was just no real centralization for folks to just kind of order and discover brands and new buyers how they wanted to. So LeafLink servicing the B2B industry for the cannabis space by providing a real centralized marketplace for buyers and sellers within the state to interact with one another, discover new products.
Okay, is that within the state only? I mean, because I also see where crossing state lines becomes an issue right away. But
Yep.
is this where you focus to be able to give a solution just within the state only?
Yeah, with LeafLink's tech, we're able to kind of connect with the state compliance softwares to kind of ring fence based on the license.
Mhm.
So they'll see it as, only Colorado companies can transact with Colorado companies. You're not going to be able to even see anybody in Michigan if your license is based in Colorado. But yeah, LeafLink from the start, we're looking to kind of simplify and really define the way cannabis industry does commerce. So from that, our marketplace has really expanded. We're covering about 25 states, and we're processing about $5 billion annually for
Wow.
annualized GMV for all the product that is sold on our platform. Again, LeafLink's not actually touching the product. We're merely just providing the technology for you to sell.
Okay, but that makes you a tier two, though, right? You're a tier two because you're providing the service.
Right, exactly. So again, we're not getting our hands in the product too much there. But yeah, I mean, so we've been really successful with our marketplace product, and then just kind of furthering our main mission is how do we help solve the inherent problems in the cannabis space.
Well, one of the problems I'm hearing, if I'm correct, is every state is a little bit different, and every state has to be segregated from each other for how they're processing. So, is it your job to keep up with every state as it changes?
It's one of the folks at LeafLink's jobs to do it for sure. We have a really great team of folks who know a lot of states inside and out, who are getting into the government relationships to figure out what are some of the ways that each of these new markets that are coming on board, how are they setting it up? But you're absolutely right. Each state is a little different. There's some where wholesale and kind of more of a horizontal market is there, where others are more vertical, meaning that that seed to sale comment you said before, from tiny little seed to joint in your hand, one company needs to control all of that. So there's all these different kind of personas, all these different kinds of behaviors that range from market to market that have a full impact on just the day-to-day business operations there. So LeafLink has navigated that very well, and we're looking to provide more services that cover the more larger pain points, kind of where I come into play on the payment side, just trying to find ways that we're able to kind of develop products that are able to support these new payment methods that are coming out, and just try to remove the physical painstaking form of payment that the cannabis industry has really just been forced to get to this whole time.
If there's a bank or credit union listening, which that's primarily who's following the Payments Podium, and they're going, how do I get started in cannabis banking? What advice would you tell them?
So I think it ultimately comes down to making sure that you have a really well tight buttoned up BSA AML compliance program specifically focused on supporting the cannabis space. We've been seeing it in the news. You and me are paying close attention to all the payment stuff that is going out in the ether. So I'm sure everybody else listening is too. But there's a lot of kind of question marks with just how banks are running compliance through different fintech partnerships and all this stuff. I see cannabis as no different. Compliance is the key aspect of it. Regulators want to make sure that They're mitigating risk as much as possible. So for any banks interested in getting into the space, definitely want to make sure you have a really well tightened up compliance program. Speak to folks in the cannabis space, get an understanding, have open lines of communication with folks to really help get a full understanding of how each market works, which markets you want to focus on. And then from there, it's really, deciding if you're all in or not. A lot of the cannabis operators today are kind of stuck with banks that aren't 100% committed to it, where they're allowing them to have deposit accounts, but they're not letting them access credit. They're letting them, send wires, but they're not letting them have ACH debits. So every bank is a little different. So until banks realize that they're fully pursuing cannabis and are open and ready to kind of allow all services to these folks, that's going to be the biggest kind of hurdle that they need to get through, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really help anybody, and these folks are really struggling and really looking for just a modern, innovative product to help them scale. Once they're doing this, I see nothing but green shoots ahead for the cannabis space.
Well, talking about what's ahead for the cannabis space, if you were to pull out your crystal ball of, cannabis banking, to leave us all going, or thinking about something, what do you think is the next big thing that we're going to see happen in the world of cannabis banking? What's your prediction?
Yeah, so I mean, if anybody's a fan of regulations, I feel this is going to be a fun topic for them. There is currently, and for a while, it's been passed through Congress. For the last few years, there's it used to be called safe banking, but is now safer banking, which is the Secure and Fair Enforcement Regulation Banking Act. Basically, what it does in the quick kind of 2-second version of it, its aim is to provide legal protection for financial services that serve state legal cannabis businesses. So really what that means is that if SAFER does pass, then all it will really do is remove any kind of negative implications or any negative impact on banks who want to support the cannabis space. So it's big for a couple of reasons. Number one, it allows cannabis to get financial services. So these real kind of blue chip banks that have the resources, have the technology, have the reach of these people that can get them on board, they'll be able to support the cannabis space without having any kind of an impact there. It's also great because it starts to just normalize paying with cannabis. For the longest time, payments were a huge pain point because they were either done in check, cash, or it was just very difficult to get a hold of somebody to get them to actually pay. Now with banks, that not being an excuse, there's going to be a lot faster payments and a more focused look on how payments and the cannabis space can kind of be in a good shape. So I think that's kind of the big one there. I'm not too sure the likelihood of it passing. And even if SAFER does pass, it doesn't solve all the problems. It's a great start for sure, but there's still a lot of problems with banking, with payments and cannabis that are kind of going to be at butting heads for a while. Primarily, it's still considered federally illegal, and it's still a Schedule I drug. So that's going to kind of sway other operators, sway the public perception away, and to have it not be fully accepted. It doesn't solve the credit issue in the cannabis space too. Very, very little liquidity, very little credit options are available in the cannabis space today. So while SAFER has banks more comfortable with cannabis, there's still, like the card rails, for instance, they're still very much against it. Visa and MasterCard over the last few years have actually voiced their disapproval of how some cannabis operators have been using their services, which was a kind of cause of the cannabis industry trying to figure out a way to solve these problems. And kind of what they did, they got caught and a little slap on the wrist. But, again, there's still some pretty significant problems in the space. So I think other than regulation, the best thing that can happen is just continued support from the state level, and then more states kind of taking matters into their own hands and going into each election year, voting cannabis in. We're seeing that as incredibly successful. Ohio, Minnesota were just the last two, I believe, that voted for adult use. So it's getting a lot better eyes in the public perception, and I think that's the first hurdle, right? Like once kind of the public perception sees cannabis in less of a, oh, the guy on the corner selling dime bags, and more of a, no, this is a business that gives people salaries, gives people healthcare, all this. I think that's going to be the best way for cannabis to just be more comfortable in the space. We've seen it a lot, and some of the larger states that are doing it, it's proven when done right, cannabis can be an incredible boost for any state.
Well, I gotta agree. There's a lot of opportunities that are there. I do want to thank you for coming on today. And wow, we might have to get back together and have a part two of this because you unloaded so much right there. Just the other issues that need to be discussed. I got to say, folks, if you're looking to get a hold of Connor, he's out there on LinkedIn. That's one of the ways I got in touch with him. You can also get a hold of me, and I'll make sure to get you in touch with him. And if there is a topic, or maybe there's somebody you think that needs to be on the Payments Podium, just send me an email, kevin@paymentsprofessor.com. I'll do all I can to make sure that that topic gets addressed, that person gets on and gets to voice their opinion. But for now, this is where I say, class dismissed.